It's the same thing in biology. You know, we want to study cells, so what do? We freeze them with liquid nitrogen. And then we shear them open. Now, they're not alive anymore, you know. And then we look with an electron microscope. And, oh, wow, you know, DNA is a big mess in there. We're probably not getting the right data. And so, why is it that, I just want to make a point, that this excess mass is because it's actually in the mainstream theory, it's just they don't know about it. And the reason why is because when they found 2 protons, they said, oh my God, protons are positively charged, so they should repel each other inside the nuclei, like 2 magnets would repel each other if they have the same charge, right? You're all following this? Well, when they found this, they said, oh, you know, gravity couldn't squeeze them that hard. There must be some unknown force. And the next thing they did is they invented a new force almost 100 years ago. They called it the strong force. Very convenient. And then they put it in there, and they made it exactly the strength it needed to do to push the protons together. Huh. I call that physics as you go. They did the same thing with the universe. They found their equation only predicts 4% of the universe, missing 96% of the universe. Instead of revising the equation, they said, oh, we'll invent dark matter and dark energy, throw it in there in the right percentage. Look, the equation works. Must be there. Physics as you go. Right? So then, you know, when they invented this strong force, then the next thing you know is they can't reconcile the strong force with gravity. They can't put the 2 together. Right? So now they have this big dilemma, and now they keep adding dimensions to try to make it work. You know? It ain't gonna work because the strong force does not exist. It's a figment of our imagination. It's gravity acting at the atomic level. You're dealing with mini black holes. That's why the electron spins at near the speed of light. Right? So, if you take 2 of these protons, little black hole protons, and you calculate their strength, I'm going to spare you the equations. Although you could easily follow them because they're simple. The force between 2 black hole protons is very large, so it can overcome the repulsion. But then you calculate how fast 2 protons like that with that force would rotate around each other. And you find that you know, they rotate at very high speed, 10 to the 32 centimeters per second square, very rapidly. And then you calculate, that was their acceleration, you calculate their velocity, and V turns out to equal 2.9 multiplied by 10 to the 10 centimeters per second. Anybody recognize that number? Very good. The speed of light. V equals C. So now, these little protons at the center of the atom are not only infinitely dense, but they're spinning at near the speed of light. They're spinning at very high velocity, near the speed of light. So you know all these masters that walked around saying, you are light? They meant it. Can you like visualize yourself? Can you sense yourself? Can you sense your atoms as mini black holes spinning near the speed of light? This is how dynamic you are. This is how energetic you are. It's an amazing thing. You're transferring information to the universe and back at the speed of light. You're flickering. really, really quickly. Whoosh! The vacuum, to the vacuum, back out, to the vacuum, back out, to the vacuum, back out. So who are you when you're the vacuum? Have you explored your vacuum self? You know, please don't talk to your shrink about this because it might put you some nasty drugs, you know. Bro, you're bipolar. Yes, I am. I'm sorry about that. Half the time I'm the vacuum. I don't think they have any drugs to stop that one. So, you know, I can skip some of that, but I just wanted to say, you know, you're flickering, you're informing the vacuum, flickering in and out of it very, very quickly. Everywhere is happening like this. But, you know, it's really a remarkable thing, and it's really important to become aware of this interaction. And when it's happening, you start to realize that maybe linear motion is not quite what we think it is. What I mean by that is that if we live in a fractal universe of infinite division, from infinitely big to infinitely small, then movement from point A to point B is quite different than what we assume it is. Okay? You can start to look at your hand and say, okay, my hand is going from point A to point B. And I'm going to calculate how fast it did that. Well, you know, if you close the box around your hand, then you can do it. But if you realize that it's all embedded to infinity, then you'd say, well, while my hand was going from A to B, the Earth was rotating. So I got to add that speed. And then while that was happening, the Earth was rotating, then the Sun, it was rotating around the Sun. So I got to add that speed. And then as it rotated around the Sun was moving through the galaxy. So I got to add that speed. So you know, your hand is now moving at millions of miles per second, you know. And then like, you know, you keep adding because this galaxy is in a supercluster, which is in a in a cluster, which is in a supercluster, and so on. In a universe, in a multiverse. Next thing you know, your hand's going at the speed of light. So how do you define movement? You realize that your hand is not moving linearly from A to B. That's the chopper that likes to follow me. Your hand is appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing, undoing itself, redoing itself, undoing itself, redoing itself, every time going to infinity and back. Being informed of where it must reappear. Just like a movie, where it's a bunch of frames, but if you move the frames fast enough, they appear to be smooth. And if you realize that, you're interacting with the vacuum this way, and you're good at manipulating the vacuum, what I call vacuum engineers, masters, you might be able to get your hand to disappear here and reappear over there. And skip all the points in between. Now if you did that, you want to make sure you brought your body with it, because it could be uncomfortable on this hand with missing the rest of your body. So, this leads, this understanding, this technology, this capacity to interact with the vacuum, both in your own being, but very specifically in laboratory, leads to technology that will blow your mind. Leads to technology that not only brings us to a capacity of abundance of energy, infinite amount of energy, space drive and so on, but to actually transfer the information from one end of the galaxy to the other end of the galaxy without having to go through all the points in between. And I assure you, although that might sound like far in the future, all this is just around the corner. But I wanted to say a few things on ancient civilization, because when I did this research, I was studying in parallel a lot of ancient civilizations. And the reason is that I realized that if this vacuum structure is really there, if the vacuum is polarized, if it's not just a random mess, as in defined in quantum theory currently, but actually is the source of the organization of everything, then it must have geometry. It must have a fundamental structure, and we need to understand what that structure is. And as I studied ancient civilization, these guys kept on pointing to very fundamental geometries. And they all said, this is the geometry of creation, it's everywhere, this is how creation occurs. And you can find it in almost every ancient civilization around the world. And then they built let's use that loosely. They might have got some help, you know. And very specific geometries all around the world with very specific, intense, you know, focus on very, you know, important texts that describe this geometry, this fundamental geometry of the vacuum. And I spent many, many years studying them, and I realized that there was a code that was left here by many ancient civilizations. You know, this is actually on a pillar in Egypt. It's not etched, it's not carved, it's somehow burned into the atomic structure of the granite pillar in Egypt at the Osirian temple. Then you go to China. You know, the Fu dog is the guardian of the knowledge. He guards the knowledge under his paw. And then you look under the paw, and sure enough, you get the same geometry. And this geometry that I'm talking about is very fundamental, and it is a geometry extrapolated from writing concepts of the structure of space-time that demanded a fundamental geometry that could produce all of the rest of the geometry we see in our universe, in our biology, and in our organization of the universe. And it's based on tetrahedrons. It's a 64 tetrahedron grid.